What's up, you guys? It's Graham here. So I f***ed up, and not in a small way either. I'm talking about the kind of mistake that would have completely screwed my portfolio if I didn't catch it in time. And what's crazy is that on paper it looked like I was doing everything correctly. But once I started digging deeper into what's actually going on right now, I realized that I was positioned completely incorrectly. And that's led me to make one of my biggest changes since 2020. That's why for the first time in years, I'm going to break down my entire portfolio, where I'm investing my own money throughout 2026, and the biggest opportunities out there that almost no one realizes. Because the fact is, how you're investing over these next 12 months could be costing you a lot more money than you ever thought was possible. Although before we start, if you appreciate the transparency, the best thing that you could do right now, at this very moment, is to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that already. In all seriousness, it helps with the channel tremendously, and as a thank you for doing that in the next 5 seconds, I'll finally stop asking. So thanks so much, and also big thank you to SoFi for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Alright, so in terms of what's changing in today's environment, let's talk about my biggest investment, and that would be in the stock market. For over the last decade, I have been religiously dollar cost averaging into an S&P 500 index fund on a daily basis, regardless of where the market trades. And so far that strategy has worked out incredibly well. Like, it's not even close. The S&P 500 has outperformed nearly every other asset class over the last decade, and I've benefited enormously from just staying consistent and not trying to time anything. But here's one of the biggest changes. Believe it or not, I'm investing heavier. Look, I know this sounds like the opposite of what you'd expect someone to say right now, because yeah, valuations are stretched, there's a lot of uncertainty, and honestly, every financial headline right now is designed to make you feel like the sky is about to fall. But here's what I keep coming back to. Every single time I've tried to be cautious with my stock market allocation, every time I've held back thinking, oh, I'm just gonna wait for the stock market to drop even more before I dump everything in, I've regretted it. Not once in over a decade of investing has sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the right time to buy, worked better than just dumping all your money in consistently at once. So instead of building up my cash position just in case, which I'll get to a little later, I'm now funneling more of my monthly income into the stock market, and I'm treating any dip as an excuse to buy a little more on top. Not to mention, I've just noticed that when sentiment is at its worst, that's usually the best time to buy, so that's what I'm doing. Now, separate from that, the other part of my stock market portfolio is international diversification, which currently makes up about 28% of my entire account. And yeah, so far this isn't the most popular investment since historically it tends to underperform the United States. But over the last year, I have to say this has been one of my best performing investments by a long shot. For example, year over year, it's up 38% compared to the S&P 500's 29%. And even this year, it's up 7% compared to the S&P 500, which is pretty much break even. The way I see it is that the United States is already so large and established that other countries have more room to grow, if that makes sense. That's why I'm investing a lot more into these areas, along with, in addition to that, emerging markets. Yes, this is way riskier. Yes, it's a lot more volatile. But I just can't help but feel like there's asymmetric upside for increased diversification at this point. Obviously, I'm not saying go all in, and I'm still predominantly invested in the United States. But this international diversification is becoming a hedge where if the United States still does well, great. But if it doesn't, then I have a lot to fall back on that should smooth out my returns, especially now at a time where it feels like having international exposure is more important than ever. Basically, my stock allocation is simply this: invest heavy into the S&P, invest heavy into emerging markets, and stop holding more cash than necessary just in case. However, this strategy is still relatively tame compared to the next subject, and that would be real estate. Honestly, this one by far is the most disappointing because I never thought that I'd have to do this. But as I mentioned in a previous video, I'm going to be selling off all of my real estate. Literally everything with the exception of this property that I currently live in. And a big part of that has to do with the current state of the housing market. Look, I'm just going to come out and say it. Los Angeles and California have completely destroyed housing due to a mix of regulation, restriction, and villainizing landlords to the point where I have no other choice other than to exit because they have made it literally impossible for a small landlord like me to stay in business. And if you don't believe me, just consider this. Despite me having bought my properties between 2012 and 2018 for a low price with fixed 3% mortgages, over the last few years, insurance costs have more than doubled, repair costs have tripled, and for the first time in my entire career in real estate, I now have to get a $400 an hour lawyer involved in every single rental communication just to make sure that I don't do anything incorrectly. It's gotten ridiculous because the city's become so litigious. Like, just consider that if I don't have the proper disclosures at the property itself, lawsuit. If I don't document every repair, lawsuit. If I send a wrongly worded text, lawsuit. And even though I've so far been meticulous, the risk is still there that even if I win, I lose. Like, just consider what this attorney said on X. True story, by the way. A tenant moves in, stops paying the rent, and the landlord does everything correctly by the book. But before you go to trial, you have to go through what's called mediation, at which point the tenant said, I'll move out, but you have to give me 4 months to vacate the property, cash to leave, paid up front, a waiver of all owed rent, and a sealed record. Even though this seems like an absolutely ludicrous offer when the tenant would 100% lose the case, after accounting for legal costs, trial time, and a 75-day delay for a sheriff's lockout, as it turns out, the tenant's offer is the landlord's best case scenario when they win the case. Or as Avi says, the attorney for the tenants asked for pretty much the same amount I quoted them for my fees, and the tenant's lawyer knows it's hard and expensive to collect against tenants with no assets. In fact, I remember back in 2012, I had a tenant who moved into my property, started growing weed in the garage, and then immediately stopped paying rent. At that time, it cost me about $1,500 to evict him, and it took about 60 days. Today, on the other hand, that eviction would probably cost me about $50,000 to $60,000, at which point I'd probably have to have been forced to have sold the home just to be able to pay for it. Now, thankfully, though, on the bright side, property values are still relatively strong, and that's why I've decided now is just a good time to exit. Not to mention, even though I'm still profitable on these rental properties, if I just took the money out and bought a straight-up government treasury, I'd be making just as much money, except without the risk, without the headache, without the hassle, and with 100% liquidity. Although in terms of the rest of my portfolio and where I think the biggest opportunities are, here's where things get interesting, because it's the exact opposite of what most people are doing. Although before we go into that, when it comes to the current state of the economy, regardless of what's happening, one of the smartest things that you could do right now is to optimize your money. Like, here's what's crazy. Big banks hold on to your money, but they pay you 0.01% in interest, which is basically zero. And I gotta say, that is absurd, especially when there's great alternatives out there that you could switch to and begin earning interest immediately, like with their sponsor SoFi. For those unaware, SoFi is an all-in-one finance app that allows you to bank, borrow, and invest all in one place. And when you open up a SoFi checking and savings account and set up eligible direct deposit, you could earn a competitive APY with no account fees. So instead of your money just sitting there doing nothing, it's actually working for you. And over time, that adds up because the interest you earn can continue to compound and grow. In this case, SoFi gives you up to 4% APY, which is 8 times higher than the national average. On top of that, right now when you open up a new high-yield savings account and set up an eligible direct deposit of $1,000 or more, you could earn a $50 or $400 cash bonus. Even better, but you could also get paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit and access additional FDIC insurance up to $3 million on deposits through a network of participating banks. So if you want your money to actually start working for you, just visit SoFi.com/grandbanking, click the link down below in the description, or scan the QR code on the screen to learn more and get started. To me, it's just such a no-brainer, at minimum, to use a high-yield checking or savings account for your money, whereas otherwise you'd be earning nothing. Again, the link is down below in the description, or scan the QR code on the screen. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the video. All right, so in terms of the biggest opportunities of 2026, where I'm investing my own money, and where I see the biggest upside, there's one more asset that I've been paying a lot of attention to. Not because it's popular, but because of what's going on behind the scenes, and that would be Bitcoin. For the last few years, I've been dollar cost averaging into a Bitcoin ETF, and my entire thesis is that I'm investing an amount that I'm okay losing, and if it goes up in price, then I could retire my entire bloodline. Okay, well, even though Bitcoin's down 50% from its peak, I am using this as an opportunity to increase my allocation a little more than I did before. And surprisingly, over the last month or so, it's actually held up pretty well. And if Bitcoin has taught me anything, it's that usually the best time to buy Bitcoin is when everyone else thinks that this time is different, it's done forever, Bitcoin is dumb. Of course, I'm not going all in, and this is still a small part of my portfolio, especially as quantum computing gets better and better. But people are now beginning to argue that as institutional participation grows, Bitcoin's volatility and likelihood of catastrophic drawdowns diminish, making it function more as a portfolio efficiency tool than a speculative bet. In terms of my own thoughts though, and why I'm buying a little more at these levels, here's my reasoning. With governments around the world running massive deficits, with the national debt continuing to climb, and with institutional adoption accelerating at a pace that honestly I didn't expect this quickly, the asymmetric upside of holding Bitcoin as a percentage of your portfolio for diversification is just too compelling to ignore. Again, it could all be worth potentially nothing for all I know, but I'd rather have a small percentage in it than not be exposed at all. Although in terms of the rest of my portfolio, there are a few other categories that most people wouldn't expect, including 1, cash and treasuries. Believe it or not, this makes up about 25% of my entire portfolio, and as it stands right now, it's currently invested in a mix of tax-free muni bonds earning a blended rate of about 4.2% and government treasuries earning about 3.5%. But lately, I will admit, I took this one a bit too far, and 25% is too much to hold on to, given how little I realistically spend. I just think, being vulnerable here, at some point my mindset shifted from how do I grow this account as fast as possible to how do I make sure I don't lose what I've spent so much time building up. Like, I genuinely feel as though I'm playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because look, when you're young and you have nothing to lose, it makes sense to be aggressive. You have to take big swings. That's your time to do it. But once you've hit a certain point, the calculus completely changes. All of a sudden, your worst possible outcome is not, oh, you missed out on a few extra percent this year. It's, you lost 15 years of growth because you got greedy trying to squeeze out the extra few percent. However, over the last few years, I did become way too comfortable with the protection that holding all of these treasuries gave me. And looking back, I let this position grow a lot larger than it really needed to be. That's why I've started deploying more of this money into the markets and throughout investments that I've mentioned earlier. Consider it like the great rotation, where I take money from over here and I just kind of move it over there. Now, so far, everything I've talked about is pretty traditional. We're talking stocks, bonds, real estate, Bitcoin, but there are 2 other parts of my portfolio that I've rarely ever talked about, and a few of these have quietly outperformed everything else that I've done, and that would be cars and collectibles. Well, let's start off with this one. In 2021, I bought a 2005 Ford GT because first, it's one of the coolest cars ever made, and second, they hold their value really, really well. This car, without exaggeration, is kind of like owning an index fund, where long-term it just consistently ticks higher and higher. And since I bought it, to my utter amazement, it's gone up in value about 65%, which is pretty much on par with the S&P 500. And over the next 10 to 20 years, I can't see how this wouldn't be worth $1 million at some point. That's why this Ford GT has actually become one of my best purchases over the last 5 years. However, as nice as that is, I did wind up losing about 30% buying this 2010 Tesla Roadster. In my mind, I just thought, this is the original Tesla. They rarely come up for sale. There's only about 1,500 of these still in existence. And if the original iPhone could be worth $100,000, this car should at least become a future classic. But today, it's not. Tesla values continue to plummet as people don't want to be associated with Elon Musk. The car needed quite a few repairs, and even though I absolutely love driving it, from a value perspective, it didn't do anywhere close to as well as I thought. Overall, though, the lesson here with cars is that if you pick correctly, you could absolutely buy a car, drive it for free, and potentially even make some money from it. To me, I think you'd be pretty safe with the Honda S2000, Lotus Elise, Dodge Viper GTS, manual Audi R8, manual Lamborghini Gallardo, Ferrari 458, or a Mercedes SLS AMG. From my perspective, those should be cars that increase in value about 2 to 5% a year. But yeah, big picture, cars are really lifestyle purchases that if they happen to go up in value, great. But if they don't, you should hopefully still enjoy owning and driving them, and that's probably the healthiest relationship you could have with something like this. Besides that though, there is another asset class that I've been quietly getting into, and the channel members have actually seen this a few weeks ago when I gave a full tour of my collection, and that would be artwork. I'm a huge fan of early Disney, and I was fortunate enough to be able to pick up some early pieces from the original Disney animator, Mark Davis, including several early concept sketches of the Haunted Mansion and these hand-drawn sketches from The Nightmare Before Christmas. I also bought a signed Tommy Pickles Rugrats self from the first episode and a signed Michael Jordan from Space Jam. Even though these are more of a hobby than anything, if you find a niche that you're really into, there's a chance that you could actually get into it and make some money in the process, which is, hey, that's a win-win. And by the way, the same thing also applies to watches, which I've been collecting for a while now, and some of those have done really well. In fact, I just filmed an entire video breaking down my full watch collection, what I paid, and what they're worth today. That one is posted exclusively for channel members, along with a new video that you won't see anywhere else every single week. So if you want to check that out and get early access to every single video that I do, including this one here, by the way, I posted this early, feel free to join as a channel member, and I really hope you enjoy that content. Finally, there is one last investment that I've never really talked about before, and I just thought about not including it here, but screw it. I have money throughout a variety of private equity investments, and so far, I've really just regretted it. This all started about 6 years ago when I invested in a handful of early stage companies that I genuinely liked and used. And on paper, some of these have done pretty well. But what nobody tells you is that it doesn't matter how the returns look like on paper because you can't actually do anything with it. With all of these, I have so far been locked up for years with the potential to be locked up pretty much indefinitely. There are mandatory holding periods. I have been diluted time and time again. My ownership percentage keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. There are sometimes only small redemption windows that open up once a year, if at all. If I try to sell on the secondary market, I sometimes have to get a discount of up to 70% just to be able to find a buyer, if one even exists. And even if I want to get out of some of these, I just can't. It's impossible. Even if they're up 300%, you can't do anything with it. I just think if there's a lesson here, don't undervalue simplicity because it's a lot more important than most people think. And look, I want to be really transparent here, but I'm not telling anyone to go and copy what I'm doing. My situation's pretty unique, and my timeline is long enough that I could afford to be a little more aggressive. But the principle behind everything I'm talking about here, I do think applies to everybody. Don't just ignore your portfolio and let it run on autopilot forever. I've just noticed that conditions change, your life changes, your risk tolerance changes, and it's okay to take a look every now and then and make sure what you're doing is actually in your best interest. That's exactly what happened to me, and catching it is probably going to save me a lot of hassle over the next decade. So I just think the big takeaway is this. The best portfolio is not the one that looks the most impressive on a spreadsheet. It's the one that allows you to live your life without constantly worrying about it. For me, that just means fewer moving parts, more liquidity, and making sure my portfolio is working for me instead of the other way around. So if you take away nothing else from this, just be honest with yourself about where you're at, run the numbers, and don't be afraid to make a change, even if it's getting rid of something that used to work. Except, of course, smashing the like button and subscribing if you haven't done that already, because that always works. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out our sponsor down below in the description, or join as a channel member so you get videos like this, early access, as well as like extra stuff too. So thank you so much, really appreciate it, and until next time.